Our next session starts now with a panel entitled Measuring 5G Performance. Please welcome the panelists, Jawad Abbassi, Head of MENA Region GSMA, Mohamed Tantawi, Managing Director, MEA and Turkey Service Provider, Cisco Systems, Ahmad Farroukh, CEO, Smile Telecoms, Yaqoub AlZarouni, Head of Information Security, Risk Management and IOC, DUE, and Ken Campbell, Partner PMP Strategy. Moderating the session, Nick Gorgoglione, Marketing Head, Vodafone Oman. Gentlemen, welcome on stage.
Welcome to the lunchtime session. Today we're going to be talking about measuring 5G performance, a topic that I think brings together a lot of elements and can be looked at from a lot of perspectives, from a commercial perspective, from a technical perspective, and also from a customer perspective. We are living in unprecedented times within our industry. There are more and more efforts to cut costs and draw efficiencies, while customer demand is just increasing and customer expectation is increasing day by day. Recently, I was reading a study in Finland has allocated that the right to communication is seen within the public, or within the Finnish public, as a fundamental human right. So it's been put on the same level as things like water, electricity, and shelter. And this is just going to increase as we move into times where the concept of offline become obsolete and the world just becomes more and more connected. So when we look at measurement of 5G performance or 5G investment, we need to look at it from an innovation perspective, but also an efficiency perspective, because otherwise we're not going to be able to sustain the prices that we currently have against the demand, never mind even an inflated demand that is going to come up in the future. So I think this topic is a technical topic, but I also think it is a fundamental topic that sits at the heart of where our industry will go in the future. So to open up the discussion, I thought I'd start with something that's quite general, just to get it moving, and then we'll go into some specific questions. So I thought with Jawad, we take 5G for granted. Why 5G? Is it worth it? Is it generating the traffic? And are people going on it?
Thank you, Nick. As you know, the GSMA is the Association of Mobile Operators globally. And we have the GSMA intelligence, which monitors and tracks and analyzes the status of the mobile markets across the world, in addition to the larger ecosystem. 5G is here. It's here to stay. And it's actually, it's very impressive what has been achieved with 5G. For example, with 3G technology, reaching the first 1 billion users took around 11 years. For 4G, it took more than 8 years, but according to GSMA intelligence and industry statistics, by the end of the 4th year of commercial 5G launches, there will be 5G, by the end of this year, there will be 5G, 1 billion 5G users. Already, 220 operators globally have commercially launched 5G, and the supply of networks and the adoption and the availability of handsets has been actually quite impressive relative to other technologies, other generations. Now, having said this, many operators report that the launch of 5G has helped them in offering very fast fiber-like fixed internet services. So in areas where there is no fiber, the presence of 5G allows them to offer fiber-like speeds. However, there's still a lag of the use of the other traits of the 5G network specifications. So the lower latency and the network slicing features of the 5G network are still to materialize in new business models. There's always a lag of supplying the technology platform and then the innovation that results on it. And the big example we have is how 4G changed the world as we know it. Before 4G, the sharing gig economy did not happen. So the streaming revolution, the Uber, mobile broadband, real adoption happened with 4G and not with 3G. So we expect that the massive growth in 5G, the presence of it, the move towards standalone networks will, in time, unleash the slew of innovation that you need to build an ecosystem on 5G. And in the region, in the Arab world, for example, some middle-income operators will benefit from the fact that the GCC countries were the pioneers. So sometimes it helps to be on the lagging edge of technology. So the GCC countries have commercially launched 5G. There will be a launch of 5G in Jordan, for example, towards the end of 2023 or first of 2024. It will help them to see the experiences in richer countries. So overall, very, very good progress. And it's here to stay, and it's definitely worth it.
Amazing. Ken, I think if we can hand it over to you to offer a perspective. You're mic'd up.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously about to experience a kind of paradigm shift. We've historically measured our success in terms of number of subscribers and ARPU, and we're certainly going to shift with 5G towards more thinking about connected devices, of course, thinking about applications, thinking about usage on those applications. We're going to have to monitor and manage our networks differently. That said, I have the opportunity to work in emerging markets and also in Europe. In Europe, or broadly across Europe, I think 5G penetration is still at single-digit percentage. Maybe Finland's higher, probably 15% or so, but way behind and anticipated to continue to be way behind South Korea and certainly other parts of Asia. So I think what's lagging is the application layer. I still don't think. When I was talking to some friends outside, and did anybody notice they were on 5G? Not really. But the applications are there, the use cases are there, and they are coming. We think that it'll be largely driven by B2B to start. We see I'm involved in one test case, a use case, developing a manufacturing facility over 5G in Canada. With Toyota, and I think those kinds of, and then you see port applications, you see other applications. I think UAE is probably ahead in many things, but those are slow to come, and I think that's the one thing I'd say about 5G. We've been talking about it for, well, I guess since before 4G came, and it's just taking a bit of time, but is going to be impactful and probably more impactful than any other generation before it.
Really, really interesting. And I think that brings on to the next question. I mean, we know that 5G offers an additional capacity layer, and we're all trying to move as many customers to that layer. I mean, even us at Vodafone Oman, who are just starting out, we are trying to move as many people onto it because it's more efficient for us. So if I can direct this to Ahmad, what unexpected barriers are you facing trying to do this, or are you seeing operators facing trying to do this? And what sort of performance monitoring do you do that helps define your 5G rollout strategy, and how do you adjust accordingly?
Thank you. I think to come back a little bit, what I think personally is that the unfortunate COVID that took place in our world have gave another chance for operators and have found and established a fact that connectivity is a must. And this is where all of us are going, basically, and it's around, basically, the connectivity. Customers, really, what they need is a reliable data with speed. It can be 5G, it can be 4G, maybe 3G. However, operators have to come back to this need and provide this unique type, basically, of service, and definitely 5G is the technology that can basically provide it. I think the biggest barrier would be, first of all, licensing in some countries, because some government, with due respect, and operators tried, some government and regulators tried to make from it a Pandora box, like, okay, it's time to pick some money. Though investment in 5G is very critically and significant. And specifically now 5G, if we talk about the antennas, the weight of the antennas, etc., is specific. The second, I think, element is the availability of affordable 5G. You don't want to offer a very unique and a little bit heavy in investment technology for the 10% of your subscribers or the high-value guys. You need this technology to spread across. You need customers to enjoy this 5G. So I think the device availability and affordable, reasonable prices that also these devices have, I would say, the efficient chipset that can give you the experience of a 5G is quite necessary. The other thing is certain legacy matters. For example, some operators have to change their SIM cards. And imagine if you have 20 million customers or 40 million customers, and it's a process to change their SIM cards. However, the other use of the fixed wireless as on the 5G is really vouching for this experience for people to move into the mobility. So what I've seen is that most operators are starting by applying 5G as the best and speed to market a fixed wireless solution. Even those who were not in the fixed wireless, when they moved to 5G, immediately they adopted these 5G routers, reasonable pricing, reasonable packages for the customers to enjoy them. I think it's a stage, we went through this a little bit through 3G because I'm talking about more emerging markets, mainly in my beloved continent in Africa. It's like it took a while to move from 2G to 3G to 5G, specifically because of the devices. Now I think operators want to benefit from their investment in the 5G, promoting the fixed wireless and moving from it backwards.
Really, really interesting. And I think that brings over to the next question, if I can direct it to yourself, Tantawi. Talking about fixed wireless access, what are the best strategies to increase fixed wireless access penetration through 5G? What are the challenges that you see, and how do you mitigate performance challenges from congestion that we've seen many operators struggle with?
Thanks, Nick. I guess fixed wireless access has been actually quite challenged for a long time at the time of the 4G. Now the speeds at the 5G justifies a lot on having fixed wireless access. I think the performance that we can see on FWA is actually enhancing and enabling the 5G going there. The problem comes always on actually whether you're going to connect that on fiber, is going to be underground, overground, how you're going to manage basically the complexity of that. From time to market point of view, I believe it gives a lot of privilege. But if you are able to manage the challenges around the enrollment and around the civil part related to that, I think it gives a big boost on the presence on this layer. I think that's from one angle. I guess at the other side, fixed wireless access, normally the majority of the service providers, they go with a lot of fiber enrollment as part of their radio access type of enrollment. So for them would become, in our region specifically, very easy to deploy and faster time to market for them.
Perfect, thank you. And Yaqoub, I think similar the question, I think, because specifically with your experience within DO, what do you feel are the best strategies to increase FWA penetration through 5G, and what challenges have you seen emerge over the last couple of years?
Okay, if we speak about challenges, the most challenge is COVID and standardization of 5G.
Yeah.
Adaptation from vendors to the standard. Each one was going in his own journey. where he wants to be unique and he wants to be in an era where everyone else is not available. However, it's the most important is to deliver to the customers what have been promised from this technology, because each one of the customers believes that with the 5G, he will have a pipe of 1G connectivity working with him. So it comes the quality of the service. When we speak about 5G, the most challenging part is maintaining the customer quality and customer-centric of this provided service to him. So the most challenging that when we launched the 5G, it was the we started, I remember it is in 2019, and it was big shouts all over about how latency will be very low latency, very high number of connected devices, very high speed with the 5G NSA. And now booming along with the 5G SA will be a lot of other use cases which promise a lot of improvement to the quality of the customer's life and making his life more simpler and introducing more challenges to the comers who wants to play a role in the providing services on top of this high wireless speed connectivity, not fiber speed connectivity. Because now when we speak about 5G, we are talking about fiber speed over the wireless. So this is one of the most challenging part, that to deliver this expectation to the customer. The second one will be measuring the expectation of the customer and ensuring that you are providing that the service that he is looking for in a reliable, sustainable way. Not only that you are promising something, but you are not delivering it. But it's providing 5G does not end by showing the 5G in your network name.
100%. I think, Jawad, you had something you wanted to...
I want to add a point on fiber optics and its interdependence with 5G and 4G deployments. Not all markets in our region have full competition or some competition in fiber optics. So we have some markets where there are artificial barriers facing operators in laying of fiber optics. They have to get their fiber optic connectivity from monopoly players without service level agreements at much higher prices than they should be paying. So if we want, from a policy perspective, if we want an ideal, optimal rollout of 4G and 5G networks, the first thing to do is actually to introduce a level of competition in fiber optic markets. Every licensed operator should be able to lay down their own fiber optics. And we've seen in competitive markets, we've seen the dynamic of competition really play out well. So in some markets, operators struck deals with the electricity companies to have aerial fiber on the electricity poles. Some of them used the fixed operators for their wooden poles, and some of them dug their own infrastructure. In addition, there's a lot of network sharing, commercial-based network sharing. So if you open competition, that creates a dynamic whereby you get a lot of extra fiber optic investments in the country for the benefit of the population and the benefit of what we call an optimal optimal deployment of 4G and 5G networks. Because realistically, you can't really have a good functioning 4G network, let alone 5G network, if operators are hindered from their own fiber optics or have to pay a lot more than they should pay, or, which is the worst case scenario, having to pay 10 or 12 times what they need to pay, in addition to not having a service level agreement for the fiber optics.
Yeah.
So competition.
Amazing. And I think that sort of brings, and I think, Yaqoub, you started talking about 5G standalone versus non-standalone. Evolved MBB and fixed are current typical use cases for mass 5G NSA adoption. However, at least from what I've seen, the most impressive 5G use cases are only possible with 5G standalone and network slicing, so things like virtual reality, AR, driverless cars, etc. So if I can direct this first to Ken and then to Yaqoub, do you foresee any other use cases that could facilitate a move to 5G standalone that specifically benefit customers and not just enterprise? And how do you justify using performance and other use cases to generate better investment for 5G standalone?
Okay, that's a long question. Yeah, I think in terms of consumer use cases, so I think there's plenty of B2B ones that we're all looking at and discovering. I think you have gaming. Obviously, that's I think probably the most interesting. We heard somebody earlier talking about the metaverse and all the different types of ways that we can interact on a network. So, but I think particular gaming is probably one of the bigger apps that are going to drive it. But is that alone going to drive penetration and take up on 5G? Not likely. I think we're going to probably discover more applications in education, in healthcare, but I go back to the enterprise development that really needs to happen for it to kick off. And I think if we're looking here, a year from now or 2 years from now, we're going to see that's where 5G really starts.
Amazing. Yaqoub?
Okay. Let's put it in this way. If we talk consumer, usually consumer covered by NSA. So SA there is use cases promised for SA over consumer, but is not that what it is being looked at. 5G SA, in my perspective, is not a carpet approach, it's a use case approach. It's built on top of use cases. So unless that you have a real use cases and how you will develop this use case, your investment in 5G SA is gonna be hitting your ROI. And your board of directors will question the CEO. So it should be linked in the 5G SA. It's an era where the promise of having the commercial furnishing the technology, it's the start of this era. That everything will be built in use cases. And based on the use cases, the investment and how the penetration will be rolled out, it will be there. So mostly it will be, so if we look at it, today there is a lot of health and safety works. Take example, mountain works and working in electricity, railroads and electricity lines. Having drones going and checking this stuff, inspecting them, will reduce the OpEx extremely in these companies. So these companies will be looking to this because it will reduce the health and safety that depends on the workers and move it to the drones and the equipment that will be used. However, they will require, so it will reduce their OpEx and will be able to give some of their capex to the operators so that these guys, along with their partners, develop this use case to them and furnish the future of it, which will substantially goes to be extended to the consumer part. But if we will look from SA perspective, there is some of the use cases of going, say, metaverse, augmented reality, and these ones, it might be, but in a long term, not in a short term.
I would love to add on this one. Actually, we can see industries more on the B2B side. As you just mentioned, metaverse is not there on actually 5G yet. And I've heard yesterday it will not happen. But we can see it actually, Canada is doing something on agriculture, on actually automating a lot on the agriculture industries, transportation, public safety, anything that has a use case with a high definition video, time sensitive to latency. I believe 5G makes a perfect sense to enroll. The point is whether the service providers will be able to monetize that at the right level of ARPO, or it's going to be too expensive for delivering this traffic.
Amazing. Ahmed?
Well, I think it's country specific and market very, very specific. If market penetration of data is still at the level of 30%, 5G alone will not survive. Why? If you have to look at again, at the end of the day, operators have to survive by generating revenues, investing in their capex. And sometimes this investment in capex is a little bit painful because everybody wants an ROI the soonest possible. And in our industry, it takes sometimes some time. So if in a country, for example, revenues are split, I can take East Africa. Revenues are split 60% voice, and we're talking about the beloved 2G, most efficient technology, in my opinion, for delivering something, the 2G profitability, and then 20% or 30% from data and 10% or more from mobile financial services. Any new entrant cannot depend on a 30% of data from this market share. In Japan, it's a different story. Maybe in Korea, it's a different story. In UAE, it will be a different story. Yeah. So I think it's a market specific. However, it will come, as Yaqoub mentioned, with time, it has basically to come. Specifically on the 5G private networks.
Yes.
Going into industries, oil fields, gas fields, train stations, etc. I think it will come with time.
Jawad, I think...
Yes, on the issue of incentive to invest in network infrastructures and viability of mobile operators, there are also massive policy components that governments and policymakers need to take care of and need to fully understand and appreciate. One is spectrum pricing and availability of spectrum. Spectrum for 5G cannot, should not, and would not, will not, never be priced at the level that 3G spectrum or 4G spectrum was. So that's one important. And also, governments and policymakers need to also look at the situation in their specific markets. We've seen in the region markets where operators give back some of the spectrum and opt to invest in their infrastructure because the spectrum is priced so dearly. So if you are a policymaker and you actually have free and available spectrum that the operators are not taking and are not leasing from you, that means you're pricing it really expensive, that it makes more sense for them to invest extra into their capital expenditure than to get spectrum. So spectrum policy is very important, and also allowing operators on a commercial basis to network share. Don't mandate it, don't force them to share their networks, but do allow it where it's commercially viable and whether there is a room for commercial agreement between them. That should also enhance the incentivize them to invest in their networks and enhance the financial viability of operators, because if they're financially viable, you're guaranteed that investments in your mobile broadband networks will continue to happen. If they're, God forbid, become not viable financially, you will actually, as a country, choke off investments in your mobile broadband network, which is the foundation of your knowledge economy.
I mean, Ken, I think that brings us on the topic of network sharing, and specifically network sharing within the 5G realm. Do you think it's inevitable?
I do, for the same economic, I mean, it depends on the market. Right. You're going to have facilities-based competition in Europe, 2 or 3 networks, or maybe at least in urban areas. But in many rural areas, you can't afford more than that, more than one. So we do see network sharing on the fiber side happening because of the plain economics of it. And on the wireless side, I do think that we're going to talk about a lot more sharing than we've seen in the past. We've already seen the delayering of organizations, the carving out of passive infrastructure and sharing of passive infrastructure. The next step, and we're seeing it in Europe, is sharing of more active infrastructure. Why? Because the economics, the capital that you need to deploy to make 5G successful, or to make whatever the newest technology successful, does not make sense unless you're sharing in particular areas. So there's going to be a mix of facilities-based competition and sharing. But I think governments and policymakers, to your point, really should encourage it. Otherwise, operators are going to struggle to invest the capital needed to make this next generation successful. And that speaks nothing of the licensing fees, which is another question.
But do you think that will lead to more consolidation within the market? So I think network sharing as a precursor to consolidation.
Well, I think again, I'll reference Europe. Some markets are moving the other way, but we're really going around 4 operators to 3 operators. Even in the UK, where Vodafone is, I think they'd love to consolidate. Spain's a bit of a mess, and likely going to see, or we are going to see consolidation there. So yeah, I think you're going to see things settle on, at least on the wireless side, around 3 operators, and not only wireless operators, but converged operators, because that's the way our networks are most effective today.
And that sort of goes on to the next thing in terms of making things efficient. So a lot of the 5G use cases that we've seen at the moment are very either agricultural based or urban based. And there's always a lot of debate around making 5G really, well, at least the coverage completely ubiquitous. So how would we use measurement to justify investment beyond core population areas? Ahmad?
I think we have to go back to this point. It's not about sharing. It's operators, it's time for them, excuse me, to start real cooperation. And it in all the matters. Not, I'm sorry for that. Not only on infrastructure, and as Jawad mentioned, regulators have to open again. Sorry with this cold. So the cooperation is a must for 5G cases to survive.
All right, and Yaqoub, what are the conversations like internally around 5G investment beyond core population areas, moving into broader coverage?
Okay.
Especially within difficult terrains. I'd imagine in UAE around the Hatta areas or mountainous areas, etc.
Actually, first, you need to see how the plan will go first. You need to check all the KPIs and what are the measures that you have. So first of the points that you need to, when you plan for 5G, to see the penetration of the compatible 5G devices. So instead of you go in a carpet approach, which will take you long time to get an ROI, you based on the data. Operators are the vest of data. So oil fields of data, it's with the operators. So they can decide where to go and where to reach. So first thing that you can use to plan your 5G and how you will roll it out, the compatible devices of 5G penetrated in your network. So if you have, let's assume, Hatta, having a 1,000 device based downtown, you see that it has 100, which is unrealistic, but let's take it. 100 device, for sure I will go for Hatta to build a 5G there. And lower my speed in downtown. And the vice versa. If I see a more active user moving when they're between generation of devices based on the technology available in area, then I will target also these areas because I know this area, the users there, with the technology change, they change their devices. So I know that this area is an adaptable area where it will also bring forth. So it is mainly how the penetrated devices and the penetration of active users goes beyond the technology, and they always look for something extra. So this is how the commercial plan for the 5G and the 5G is going to be.
So, I mean, Jawad, have you seen operators having a different approach to what Yaqoub has said in terms of deciding where and when to deploy sites?
Sometimes it's the policymakers and regulators mandating things. So, for example, in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar, the regulators said we're going to really reduce spectrum fees, but you're going to have these coverage obligations and these speed obligations. Similarly, in Jordan, the agreement is for them to cover, I believe, 40% of the population within the first 2 or 3 years. I don't remember. So it's a combination of what they're legally required and where the market leads them. But the example in the UAE, for example, operators were pleasantly surprised with 5G. That one operator reported that in areas where 5G coverage was there, live sports broadcasting switched from satellite to 5G.
Oh, wow.
So whereas live sports broadcasting used to be a satellite revenue stream. Now it's actually a 5G telecom network stream because of its better performance. So sometimes you're pleasantly surprised. Supply creates its own demand. And on the issue of competition, so long as you have 3 operators, you have a competitive market. Sometimes in the EU, they want to raise it to 4 or 5. That's too much. We've actually, our GSMA intelligence research have shown that sometimes a 3 operator market is often more competitive than a 4 market operator. So anything over 2 is competitive, and governments should not mandate 4 or 5 operators in the presence of 3 operators.
Excellent. I mean, going into sort of leapfrogging from difficult terrains, because one of the things that we often talk about is the possible increase or 5G sites increasing the necessity to increase fiber penetration. And sometimes there's a workaround with microwave links. Now, do you use performance to forecast backhaul deployment strategies within whether you use links or additional sites to boost up the fiber penetration? So, Mohamed, if I can.
For me,
direct.
I guess on microwave being actually on the backhaul side, it's not as common in the region, with the exception of some of the countries in Africa. We have seen that still existing. In the region, backhauling mainly around fiber, I would say would make more sense, and the economic actually sense for the service providers. But following on what Jawad was just mentioning, I think running actually profitability on a sell side base and actually driving a bit of regulatory reform on shaping the future with them on how we maintain the investment on 5G and at the same time justify the lower ARPU at the rural areas or other options, provided that the regulatory side are comprehensive to these ingredients.
Excellent, excellent. Ken?
Yeah, I think that, as one of my colleagues often says, a network is only as strong as its weakest link. So fiber eventually will be deployed to all sites. The latency requirements of most of the use cases for 5G are such that you're going to need the latency properties of fiber. I think we're going to be challenged otherwise, and it does raise the question of whether, it goes back to the question of shared networks and building out infrastructure in rural areas. But definitely, we saw it with 4G. I mean, when we experienced congestion on our networks on 4G and had to quickly move to fiber, and that continues to this day. So I do believe that microwave and other forms of microwave backhaul serves as a really, a suitable solution in some cases, and it allows you to get up and running quickly. But as data demand grows, and we're going to have to fiber those sites, and particularly as 5G use cases start to become more mature.
And how far do you think we are from seeing 5G use cases maturing? I
think, at least personally, I think we're seeing good and interesting trials now. I think you have to ask when the chipsets are going to be ready for prime time. I kind of think it's going to be at least a year and a half out. Our friends at Cisco and others may think otherwise, but I don't know. Every generation seems to take a bit more time than we expect, and I'd love to see it sooner. But I think in this particular generation, it's all about the application layer, and we're just not there yet in most of the ones that are going to drive critical mass adoption.
It does feel slower than 3G to 4G, or perhaps more concentrated, perhaps because 4G has wider wavelengths, so the deployment of it reached more people quicker. But Jawad, what are you seeing in terms of how far do you think Africa is from really realizing the potential of 5G?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Our projections for 2030 is that in North America, Europe, and East Asia, more than 90% or close to 90% of subscribers will be 5G subscribers. And of connections also, not just subscribers, of all connections will be 5G connections. However, globally, that number will come to around 50%. And I believe in Africa, I forget the exact number, but it's less than a third or around a third in sub-Saharan Africa. So the technological gaps will persist through 2030. And that's something also for policymakers, industry, and all concerned stakeholders should really look at. But yes, the gap of technological advancements between areas of the world will persist through 2030.
Yeah, I do share the same basically views. It's going to take some time, specifically in emerging markets, for the 5G penetration to accelerate. Again, we need to talk about operators, their profitability, their cooperation on different levels. We just talked about fiber to the site versus microwave. So if an operator A put the microwave for redundancy and operator B provided the fiber, this is for me a 5G case because their customers are connected all the time. You cannot drive a self-driven car on a bridge and 5G goes down, right? Yeah. You're done. You're in the water. So again, it needs to come basically with time. Again, cooperation between operators is needed in order for the technology gap to be covered. Operators are juggling, I say now, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. Very brave ones are saying, you know what? The most expensive technology, 3G, shut down. They did it in Japan. Some other markets are following. However, in other markets, when you look at your devices, if my majority of handheld devices on mobility are still on 3G, I'm not going to take this risk. So I think time factor is a little bit needed. Government policies are needed. Regulatory policies are needed in order to promote technology for the well-being of the subscribers.
And that's sort of a chicken and egg type of situation where on one hand, the rollout is based on practical measures like handset availability, et cetera, or profitability per site, as you were saying. But the realization of a lot of the use cases come with actually filling the whole map. And then it really starts to turbocharge, but it becomes difficult to justify that as a rolling investment. So on the one hand, I think as an industry we can see the future, but on the other hand, we're also held back by practicalities. So it's difficult to balance those two things, and I think often, well, hopefully, those gaps will become smaller and smaller, and then one or two use cases like the driverless cars will really spearhead investment in areas where we currently don't have those investments. So Ahmed, do you have any further thoughts on that?
I guess honestly it's 100% driven by the use cases, and you just mentioned now the autonomous cars gonna drive a lot of demand on that. But there are in other industries, I believe there is a lot of focus on use cases in terms of actually monitoring real time, driving a bit of further enhancement in the customer experience. I believe we are looking into things for granted for our generation, not for the younger and the youth. They are going with far more speed and far more requirements. But still, the applications that delivers the highest monetization can run on 4G or 5G, like mobile payment, retail experience, all that is happening in this area. But in the coming phase, industrial, healthcare, public safety, intelligent traffic systems, all these gonna put a lot of traffic on the network. And I believe we're gonna see a huge ramp up of 5G traffic. I think service providers need to be very smart around monetizing that in a gradual phase and driving further demand to fill the highways because they invested a lot. I think we have to gather the potential on making this work and drive an experience that was unprecedented in the industry.
getting us closer to the tipping point where it just sort of, it goes quite quickly. Well, I think we're nearly out of time. I'm not sure if anybody would like to just have some closing remarks. Perhaps, Jawad, if you have anything to add at the end.
I just have one rebuttal to your remark. You said operators can see the future. I think that operators, given the right policy context, can make the future, not just see the future. So let's be optimistic on that.
Amazing, amazing. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining us on the panel. We hope everybody's enjoyed it. Thank you.